hand over to the two ladies. Please do engage with us and post your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A section. We will answer them at the end. And if not all questions are answered, we will make sure that we follow up with an email and give you as much detail as possible. Can you also please hashtag us and follow us on ITKN, shorten the recession, and in the know, which is our hashtag on all social platforms. Follow us as well on @MediaWorld on Twitter, so you can give us your comments and share your insights with us. Without further ado, Katarina, you can take it away.
Thank you very much, Tumi. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope you will all enjoy this webinar. So I'll take just 15 minutes of your time, and my presentation will focus on why should brands keep advertising even in a crisis, and I'm happy to show you then some market trends in Europe, and as Tumi mentioned, on how the COVID kind of affected the markets. So just before kicking in, as Tumi mentioned, so we are a trade association, international trade association based in Brussels. We represent radio and TV publishers, broadcasters, sales houses over 50 markets, and MediaMarkt is one of our members. So before we get to what is happening currently on what are the current trends, I just wanted to take a step back and look into the past. So as much as the COVID situation currently is unprecedented, obviously, there are some lessons from the past that I believe that we can look at and learn from the previous recessions. And I hope that this will be kind of an interesting insight for you, because they all kind of prove the basic point that brands must advertise to maintain and grow their market share, which obviously you all know. But I would like to kind of prove my point that it's more important or essential in a recession. So I selected a couple very detailed research that went into the previous recessions throughout the century, and just show you the snapshot that they all kind of prove a similar point. So we'll start in 1920s, so back in the beginning of the century with the big recession from 1920 to 1921. So here the research in Harvard Business Review proved that you can see the yellow line are the brands that increased their advertising during the crisis. So you can see the results compared to the ones who decreased their advertising. So the growth was not only during the recession, but much higher also past the recession and in the coming years. So basically they grew much faster than their rivals, not only during the downturn, but long beyond it. And so this is from the 1920s. And here are similar type of research from 1980s to 1990s. So on the left, there is a research from the recession from 1980 to 1981. Here again, we see the brands that increased their budget grew their market share much faster than their competitors. And the same in the 1990s. I put in blue the ones that increased their budget. And then you again see on the long term, they grew much faster. All this research is, by the way, available. I'll put a link at the end. So in case you need to convince your CFO to why they should keep up the advertising budgets, you can use it. So this brings us to the latest recession in 2008. So this research is from Peter Field, and here he focused on the ESOV, which is basically the excess share of voice. So the difference between brand share of voice and the brand share of market. So basically, if you're spending more on advertising than your current market share. And so here again, he analyzed the brands throughout the 2008 recession. So on the left is the first group that had the excess share of voice of 0 or less. So that means they didn't go dark. They kept advertising, but then you see the business effects were quite moderate. The middle group was kind of investing in advertising, but moderately. And the group on the right really saw the recession as an opportunity to disrupt, grow faster, and overtake their competitors. And the results show that they saw 5 times as many large business effects and 4.5 times the annual market share growth. So all this to kind of prove or to show that going dark during recession is very risky and detrimental to brands. Here's another research by Nielsen. This one is specifically for radio. So here we see that the brand that the ones that weren't exposed to the advertising, they had less buyers, reduced shopping trips, significantly lower purchases. The important thing to note is also that it's not only about the short-term effects. So as we saw in most of the charts, the effects kind of lasted long past the recession. So brand building is very important. So sometimes obviously depends on your brand, but the sales activation is obviously important. You want to increase your sales during recession, but you shouldn't forget about maintaining your share of voice and growing your market share and keeping the brand building, because then, as we see, it will show in the long term. So now I wanted to talk about radio, which is actually very efficient, and we know that it's in driving the sales activation. So why radio is the perfect medium to kind of try now in this time of recessions. So from what we saw from our members and all over, the listeners and hours spent listening are growing. So obviously the habits shifted a bit. So there's a lot of in-home listening. The morning top hour shifted a bit, so people listen a bit later. But from what we saw from radio listening, online audio listening, podcast listening, everything was growing. So people have more time, they obviously spend more time with listening. There's obviously also fewer competitors in an ad break. So a lot of brands pull their advertising. So actually it's a chance for you to get in there and get your one up on the competitors. Also radio, compared to other, for example, TV, is fast and easy to get on air. So to produce your spot, it's very quick. It's also very flexible. So in case you need to change your message from, hey, we're only open online, to, hey, our shop is now open, it's very easy to change your creative. So in that sense, it's also affordable. So the CPMs of radio are usually much lower than TV. I believe Monique later on has some specific South African examples. And it's a safe mass reach medium where it offers incremental reach to TV and other media. And so the idea is that with advertising now, we will get a bigger market share now and faster growth during the recovery. So that would be my message to you. If you have the budgets and if you can, you should try to advertise, because it's a great opportunity to disrupt and grow faster than your competitors. And so from what we see, the consumers are ready to spend, or they're coming back slowly. I know that South Africa was hit a bit later than Europe and the US, but from what we see from the UK and the US here, for example, the consumers are ready to spend and are coming back. So you kind of should be ready for them to be back on the market and spending. We also see advertisers coming back. No, sorry, one more thing. So we also saw there was an interesting research that consumers are also ready to experiment. They're more open to trying new brands because they are either because they are more available online or there's a better deal, but also because simply they're more exposed to them. So here's a research from the UK, from Radio Center, that showed that the 30% of commercial radio listeners try new brands since lockdown. So, which was more than the non-listeners. And also they were more likely to switch. So this is a great opportunity for you as a brand to get on air and kind of steal the customers from your competition. But at the same time, it's also a threat, because if your competitors keep advertising and you pull out, obviously they can steal your customers. So depending on, you don't want to be on the losing side. And so as promised, I wanted to show you some data from what we collected from our members across markets. What is happening currently. So this is gross radio ad spend from March to July. So March is the blue and July is the purple. And so as you can see in most markets, there was quite a significant dip in April and in May. But from what we see, the trend is quite positive now in the end of the summer. And most markets are bouncing back. So we see quite positive trends in terms of the ad spend. And I also selected 3 sectors that I wanted to show you in terms of the impact that there was on them. So here is automotive. So again, from March to July. So we can see that automotive on radio really was almost non-existent in April and in May. But we see very positive trends of bouncing back in most markets. So that gives some hope. For retail, the dip wasn't as significant because obviously people kept shopping. It was the category that wasn't hit as bad, yet we still see some dip in terms of the ad spend. But now again, as we see, it's going back. And then I also pulled out some data for travel and tourism, which obviously was the sector that was probably the most hit for obvious reasons. So there we can see, again, it was almost non-existent in April and May. But even then, we see especially in France and Italy, it's really bouncing back quite strongly. We believe it's probably more domestic tourism. It's a bit different focus, but they're coming back on air and the trend is quite positive. So if you need to find a medium that is for cutting costs, so not too expensive, and drive sale, and it's proven to work, radio is perfect for that. So as we said, the reach and time spent listening are strong as ever. It's a very cost-effective mass medium for brand building and for call to action, and drives traffic to the web. Here, just to offer a couple more proof or to back up the argument for radio. So this is again a research from Radio Center from the UK, which they analyzed 775 campaigns. And they saw that if you add radio to the media mix, the effect on the uplift on ad awareness, relevance, consideration, it's all quite significant. The same goes for shopping, either online or in store. So depending on your brand, if you need to drive your customers to your online shopping or in store, both work very well in radio. And here I just picked 3 case studies of brands that tried radio during lockdown and got really good results. So on the left, we have an outdoor brand from Norway that tried the radio for the very first time. Obviously, they were quite well positioned because they were selling camping gear. And in the times of lockdown, everyone was looking for this kind of product. So for them, they tried radio and they got a really good 200% year-on-year sales increase. The middle case is a camper van promotion from Belgium. Here they were driving, their main goal was to drive traffic to their website. And there it also came out really 191 online traffic +%. And the last one is a motor oil brand from Germany, where they already had a TV and an online campaign and they added radio for the first time. And then we can see also that the brand awareness and that rose quite significantly. So I would encourage you, if you haven't tried radio before in your media mix, try it and maybe you can reach similar great results as these brands. So just to conclude and sum up. So as we saw, the rules of recession have not really changed. Brands that keep advertising benefit on the short term and grow on the long term. Radio is a cost-effective medium that allows you to drive sales and increase share of voice. Consumers and ad spend are coming back, so it's important to maintain your share of voice and prevent them from switching to the competition. And as we saw, adding radio to your media mix boosts overall campaign cut-through and drives online and in-store shopping behavior. That is for me. That is it for me. Thank you very much. I hope you found it interesting.
Thank you so much, Katarina. That is very interesting. And what I also find interesting as well is the similarities, because the automotive category really did drop spend across all media, actually, when we look at ad dynamics from like March to August. And I just want to touch on a few questions, and I see you didn't touch on it in terms of the financial sector. So before we even get there, which sectors were like more resilient during the COVID lockdown situation in Europe, in the different sectors that you guys participate?
Yeah, from what we saw in general, services were quite stable. Telecommunications, obviously all these kind of mobile companies offering data plans because everyone needed a new internet connection or data. And cosmetics and hygiene also for obvious reasons, and house and gardening. So obviously all the sectors that people needed in that given time, where obviously some of them dipped still slightly, but they were quite resilient and they kept quite stable.
Wow, that's quite interesting. So in SA, in terms of the financial sector, so year on year, March to August, we saw a 19% drop across all media, and radio saw a 14% drop. Was there a similar trend in the international markets with regards to the financial sector?
Yeah, it was quite similar. We saw it kind of varied from market to market, obviously. I think in Germany it was dropped about 12% and in Italy about 20%. So I would say it's comparable. But now again, I think we see on most sectors again this upward curve. So yeah. I would say it dropped, but now it's again coming back.
Lovely. So lastly, what would you be your advice to our attendees regarding consistency in communication? Because you touched a lot on that to say you have to keep your brand awareness, you have to keep your brand building. So what would be the last statement to our attendees in terms of ad spend and consistent communication?
So yeah, so my message be, if you can, obviously it depends if the brand is in a really bad financial situation, obviously it's a bit different. But if you can, I would say that the recession could be an opportunity to really get on air and get more kind of for your money, because as we said, a lot of brands pulled out. So now it's kind of your chance to get in there and get more awareness from the customers, and get kind of higher or better off on the competitors once the recession is done. But you also have to be careful about the messaging. So there's also another research that showed that like a hard sell messages don't really work currently, or depends kind of on your brand. So you should be a bit careful and balance the emotions and kind of see where your customers are. So if you're offering a product that currently the people need, then obviously it's totally fine to kind of push it. But if it's something that might not strike the right balance, then maybe you should focus more really on the branding, kind of showing that the brand is there, and show play the emotional role. If your brand did something really good for the community, if you helped out in the recession in some way, or if you helped out your community, it's also very good to show basically that your brand is there and happy to help, and kind of so it's important to strike the balance of this. And there are also other research in this that I'm happy to share, where they really analyze the messages and what works and what doesn't. So it's very individual depending on what exactly are you selling, but you should be kind of aware of what your customers currently need and what they will respond to.
Would love that research actually, so we can share it with
yeah, I'm happy to share them.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and was quite helpful, and I hope that it was quite useful for all our attendees. So again, to remind you, please follow us, follow the hashtag, and follow us at Media World, the ITKN shorten recession, excuse me, and MM in the know hashtag across all our digital platforms. We are there. Handing over now to Monique Clausen, the pretty Monique Clausen, who comes from Kantar. Take it away, Monique.
Hi, thanks, Timmy. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm so grateful that you took this hour of your time to share with us today. I'm going to be chatting about radio insights specifically. We've got a lot of questions in the last couple of months asking us specifically if radio and audio is still relevant. So you will see I have collated all the wonderful learnings from the South African databases across Kantar. And here we are going to be focusing on radio specifically in order to answer that question. However, I want to caveat at the beginning of the presentation that we are very media neutral. So you'll see lots of slides with lots of different media. If you want specific learnings to any touch points, please do drop a question in the Q&A box or drop a mail, and we'll be more than happy to send you some learnings on lots of different touch points. But for this morning, like I said, we're really focusing on radio and digital audio. So if I can find my little button. Oh dear. There we go, I found it. So we're going to be focusing on 4 key areas. The first is really what's happening to radio listenership in South Africa during COVID. So Kantar has a barometer. We've tracked every single week consumers' general habits, feelings, emotions, from the middle of March right through to the middle of August. And I'm going to be sharing some of the media-specific insights with you. Then, obviously, we're going to answer the key question, how relevant is radio in a media plan? We're also going to be touching on audio as a whole. So moving away from thinking about radio versus digital audio to really start unpacking the value of audio planning as a whole. And then finally, we're going to end off with some creative and the importance of creative within ROI. So anyone who's here from a media agency or strat background, everything up until the little purple bar will show the power of radio in a media plan. But the little purple bar brings it all together to say it's really important that we also get our radio creative right. So what has been happening to radio listenership during COVID? Before we get into unpacking radio, I wanted to take a step back So again, this comes from the Kantar Barometer. And the question here is, are you spending more or less time engaging with different media touchpoints? And in the start of March, just before lockdown hits us, we can see that consumers are already saying, oh, you know, they are spending more time. So this isn't necessarily higher reach, it's simply higher frequency. Right up until the end of August, we see that that time of eyeballs and share of voice is actually continuing to grow. And that's massive. And that trend has continued regardless of how the lockdown levels have come down in South Africa. Now, when we unpack what was happening at the peak of our COVID period in SA across different media touchpoints, we can see that it really came as no surprise that consumers were spending a lot more time on at-home media. So we can see internet surfing, social networks, messaging, email, everything just going up. And this is where consumers say, yep, I'm definitely spending more time with these particular touch points. Then, of course, we even saw increases on TV, which is no surprise. And what we also saw was that planned increased consumption within radio, as well as radio streaming and podcasts. And again, for anyone in the media industry, we do know this, consumers were spending less time on print, so newspapers and magazines. So this is what was happening at the peak. So this was May. Now, one of the interesting things is we wanted to know how sticky these trends are. So are consumers going to continue this massive increase of consumption across all these different touch points? Or is there something that's maybe going to change habits or stick with them? So what we've done is we've looked at at the peak versus the end of August. And here, what you're looking at in terms of the blue bars is you can see how consumers' consumption patterns are changing back, perhaps to where they were prior. And here you see the resurgence of print. So consumers saying, yes, they're starting to spend time with newspapers and magazines. And the gray bars, before I focus on audio, all the things that we saw those massive spikes in terms of digital and TV, we're actually seeing those trending backwards, more or less in line with where they probably were before the pandemic hit us. The one thing that has remained sticky is, interestingly, radio. So radio, we continue to see growth within May and August, and we've actually continued to see some growth as we trend period on period. And the other thing that we also see is sticky is the online streaming of radio. So whilst undoubtedly consumers' consumption patterns of radio have changed in terms of perhaps they're not listening to drive time at 6 a.m. anymore, maybe that's new from 7 to 10. Whilst we don't have that level of detail, we certainly do know that media habits have changed during COVID and that radio wasn't necessarily massively impacted. So what does this mean for us in terms of radio? When I started in media at Kantar almost 2 decades ago, Google was still in its infancy and there was no such thing as social media, right? So social media didn't exist on a plan. Digital was maybe some really neon banners, and that was probably it. So with the new reemergence or the surgence of all these different types of touch points in planning, the question is radio still sexy? Like, does it actually deliver anything? Should we not be moving all our money to, online streaming and podcasts and targeting millennials and where the youth are? Aren't there better ways to reach target audiences? So again, what we've done is we've looked at our South African cross-media database across all the touch points within 2019 and 2020, just the campaigns that we've covered. And it covers off roughly around 2.4 billion Rand worth of campaign spend. And here I've just pulled out 3 particular touch points. I've looked at the average reach and frequency, which each touch point delivers in a campaign. And you can see that radio still continues to be the king of reach in South Africa. And what is interesting is that this is the same trend for TV that we see globally. Even in very, very developed markets where digital spend is overtaking TV, we still see that TV reach is the highest in most markets. This includes the US, the UK, and Australia. Now, before I get all the digital people up in arms going, "Mon, digital is not a channel," I know this. However, we've just aggregated all the digital channels we have, because remember, we really want to talk about digital and digital audio. And here you can see that the reach for digital, if we aggregate that, is around 22%. Obviously, it's higher in some platforms and lower in others. The same as TV would be perhaps higher reach in terrestrial and lower in others. But the key thing about radio, what radio delivers, which no other touchpoint does, is this phenomenal level of frequency. So time and time again, when radio is included in a media plan, we see massive amounts of frequency. Now, whilst that could be expected, and you go, yes, we all know that, Mon, I think what's really key here is what that means for a media strategist and a brand. And it's all about the ability to create a connection with your consumer and tell wonderful stories. And what we see in a lot of the campaigns that we track is that the real value of radio and delivering that frequency and campaign frequency and supplementing message frequency that isn't actually utilized to its full degree. So it's just a reminder that radio in a plan delivers wonderful frequency. And of course, it's we've compared radio to TV here, because TV is the highest reach medium that we track in all our campaigns in South Africa. What is interesting from radio, though, is that it delivers unique audience above and beyond TV. So back in 2015, that unique audience that radio on average was delivering was just around 2%. Fast forward 5 years, and we're seeing that radio offers a very unique audience outside of TV, almost 10%. And that again just goes to show perhaps the trend of changing media consumption behaviors. So the proliferation of more TV channels in terms of the paid environment, as well as more online content sourcing platforms. So radio has continued to actually grow that unique audience. Now, the question to all media planners is, how do you use that? Well, if you know that you're going to get high reach from TV and you're going to get a unique audience from radio, that's really how you should be thinking about planning. It's not an either or. It's not about where do I put my money? Is it on TV or radio? And it should really be the marriage of both. The other thing, so as Katarina was mentioning up front, she showed you some results about the cost effectiveness of including radio in a plan. And yeah, we again, this is a South African example. I was just converted to US dollars. We show this to a lot of international brands and clients that we work with. And here you can see the cost per 1% reach on TV alone is much higher than if you add radio into that mix. And the reason for that is because you are getting a very unique audience on radio. And this really is a trend that we see across whether you still plan by the old LSM, SEM, household income, personal income. It's a trend that we see really happening across the board. If you choose the right radio stations and the right programming, we do see that it does deliver that unique audience and therefore brings your overall cost of media planning down. So radio is still really relevant, but there's two things there that I want. I think there's two key insights that I really want to end that section off with. And the one is the high level of frequency that radio delivers, as well as the incremental reach to TV. So it's not just about the value of that, but it's really, excuse me, the value of what that means for media planning. How are you using that frequency and how are you using that incremental reach to really land your campaign messages? And what is very exciting for us is that in the last year or so, digital audio has taken off in terms of media planning and being included in media plans. And so here I'm going to share some South African examples with you that shows the value of all that free digital inventory that you are getting from radio broadcasters and the value of what that actually is. So here you've got 4 categories, and these are case studies that I've just taken from 4 categories. So the one is retail, auto, finance, and then FMCG. And the little green bar in the middle tells you the duplicated reach between everyone who is hearing your ad on radio, as well as seeing it within the digital radio or hearing it within those digital radio platforms. So whilst media planners are really excited because it's often, value added inventory, again, there's huge value in that. Not only because it gives you that duplicated reach so that you have a second opportunity to drive home your campaign messaging, but look at the unique reach that we're getting from digital. So the unique reach is people that are tuning in, but not listening to that linear broadcast necessarily. So again, if you add digital audio and radio, we need to really start thinking about it as an ecosystem, pretty much like we thought about TV, versus YouTube or Facebook a few years ago. In the last 4 to 5 years, we're really starting to see the industry think about video rather than platforms. And I would urge everyone to start thinking about audio rather than radio, digital, etc. Because that is where the value lies and the beauty of audio as a medium lies. So the last section that I wanted to end off with was the ROI of radio. Oh, exciting. Does it drive sales? Does it drive brand? So Katerina showed you some really nice examples from Europe, and we want to show you some really nice examples from our Kantar databases here. So before I start the section, I want to say that radio in a media strategy or plan has its place, and it really does have value. However, the biggest downfall of radio being able to make an impact is the creative. So this is taken from our creative database. And here you can see the light purple bars and the blue bar looks at the impact of each creative touch point. So we can see that when a digital creative is great, the impact is huge. When a TV creative is great, the impact is also very large. But in general, radio creatives, the volume of great radio creators is significantly less impactful than TV or digital. And in general, if you have a very poor creative, it's not going to make an impact. And there you can see the weakest creatives really don't make an impact. They don't deliver at 100% index. And that 100% index is for every rand you spend, that's the impact that you get back. We see that weak radio way under delivers. So whilst we spend a lot of time on our media strats, and we spend a lot of time on our TV advertising, we really need to think about our radio advertising specifically. And we know that not all radio advertising is the same. So this is a very busy chart, but if you're in media, you will be used to numbers. So if you stay with me for a second, I will explain it to you. So we've got all the categories that we track in terms of cross media. So auto, finance, food and drink, personal care, retailers, technology, and communication. Then we've got the impact on brand for radio specifically. So this looks at the radio impact on brand across 3 different metrics. Does the radio positively impact brand awareness, brand associations, and that's really your imagery and your KPIs, and then motivation, depending on the category, could be something like claimed trial or it could be consideration or intention to switch accounts, for example, in finance. So here the average would be 100 because it's indexed. So anything under 100 tells you that, radio is not really impacting that particular metric. And anything over 100 goes, yeah, we're doing really well. Now, the reason that I am showing you this chart is simply because we would think that radio creatives are adapted to every single media plan. So if you want to drive particular traffic to an online store, you want to drive search, that radio is utilized in this way, in that particular way. So the creative should be optimized for every single campaign. However, the database shows us that radio creatives perhaps tend to be used in a very similar way. So it tends to be used to drive awareness within the FMCG space, and maybe brand associations within telco and telecommunication, and really over indexes on motivation for auto. And if you think about the type of content that is in radio creatives, that's really not surprising because of the messaging that we see within radio. The other reason that I'm showing this chart is because radio can actually work. It can work across every single dimension, whether you want to drive awareness or brand associations or motivation, radio can work. But again, it comes back to the first chart that I showed in this space around the importance of good creative. Without great creative, the media plan can only do so much. The creative actually has to bring home the campaign messages. And this is for campaigns. So here is an example of where radio creative was very impactful. It's a finance category example in South Africa. And you can see that this particular brand already had high levels of awareness. But you can see that that great creative had huge impact on brand favorability, consideration, and likelihood to do business with in the future. So again, the power of good creative really can over-index on everything. And that's why we need to spend some time nailing that radio creative. The last thing I wanted to end off with was something quite perhaps surprising and controversial, which I think we need to remember as marketers in the industry. So this comes from our marketing mixed marketing model database. So it's a database of econometric modeling based on sales across a whole bunch of brands. And what we see is that, ladies and gentlemen, paid for advertising only accounts for 13% of actual sales. Now everyone goes, what? No, that can't be right. But bearing in mind that there's a lot of other things that can impact a sale of a brand. So if we go through something like a telco, it could be the quality of my signal, my download speed of my data. It could be my interaction with the call center. If I go to an FMCG brand, it could be price, distribution, availability. It could be the quality of the product that I bought and it didn't taste as great as I thought it was going to taste. So all those other touch points, all those other bits and pieces where consumers can interact with your brand, that actually accounts for 87% of brand sales on average. Now, obviously for some categories, this is higher, some categories are lower, but this is an average. I can tell you, however, that there is no category where sales or 90% of sales is driven by paid for advertising. The highest that we've seen is around 25% of sales are driven by paid for advertising. So all we can do as marketers is, no matter what touch points we use, is try and optimize and maximize that 13% bucket. So again, when we break down the individual channels of what makes up that 13%, we can see two bars. We can see the black bar, which is the direct contribution of that sale. And then the purple bar, which actually says, okay, let's look at the amount of money we invested in that channel versus the value of that impact on that sale. So when you just look at direct impact, you can see TV still number one, digital and radio are close second and third. So again, think about the value of audio planning, if we can marry the two. But what is very interesting is that when we look at the ROI from a RAND point of view, so we say we spent so much money on this particular touch point in a media plan, what was the ROI from that? That's where you can see the value of digital and radio actually outperform in terms of TV. So the value, when we look at how much we invest in the different touch points, you can see that almost everything works slightly harder than TV. So there's two ways of looking at it, but either way that you want to look at it, you can see that digital and radio works incredibly well in driving sales. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on or leave you with is that this is just the media plan. So we go, here's media planning. This is what we're doing. This is how much we're spending in a media plan. However, if we look at the creative impact and we go, this media strategy has great creative, you can see that that little bar goes from 13% to 28%. So the impact on the brand becomes that much bigger when we take that creative and the brand into account. And there you can see the ROI from direct equity impact, and the ROI from equity impact for radio is quite small. So that little black bar is very, very tiny. And the reason for that is because of what we saw in the upfront charts. On average, radio creative is not particularly impactful. So if we can make sure that our radio creative is great, we can actually help to optimize and deliver that 28%. So those are the four things that I want to leave you with. One, radio listening, in case, I've been babbling for a while and you forgot the upfront charts. Radio listening has been very resilient over lockdown, as has digital. We see that radio offers unique reach to TV and is continuing to do so. It's also cost effective. We also see that digital audio offers unique reach, and digital is more than just a value add. And then finally, the key thing, obviously, to take away is, if I haven't, I suppose, answered the question of, is radio still relevant? Yes, it is. And we need to make sure that our radio creative is also optimized. And so again, thanks so much for your time and for listening. And of course, like I said at the beginning, we have information on every single touch point. This is specifically to answer the question of, is radio still relevant? But if you want to know anything else, please drop me a line and I'll be happy to share with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Monique. There was a lot to take in. A lot of things stood out for me. And before you and I get into our little conversation, I'd like to ask our attendees to please engage with us, ask us questions. If you have any comments on specific topics that we spoke on, please do engage us. We'd love to hear your opinions and we'd love to answer your questions. So from what I'm getting, and which is what we all saw during the lockdown, is that all media grew because there was availability of audiences, there was people at home, people had more time to listen, people had more time to spend on TV, but audio remained consistent. So when the levels were coming down from within the lockdown, audio remained consistent. And that's where you see your radio also, obviously, because there's more people in cars. So people are listening more often. So therefore the time that they spend at home is now shifted to people going back to work. So what I want to ask you in terms of the audio, the growth of audio and the consistency, would you relate it to the entertainment, or is it the news factor in terms of the immediacy of sharing of information? What would you relate it to?
Wow. So I'm going to, do I'm going to say I'm not a media strategist, and nor is this a comprehensive study around, radio audience and kind of reach and frequency of radio audience during COVID. So we don't have that level of in detail, and I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to say I know the answer to that, Tumi. So I can only talk from my personal experience. So I am a podcast person. I listen to podcasts usually on the way to work, or audiobooks. But being at home, I listen to a lot of radio, which is not something that I would do in the office or perhaps before. So that's, my experience as person of one. So I don't know. I think that this is a good, it's a good opportunity for the industry to do some specific measurements in that. And I've seen some great articles. So there's lots of people and lots of broadcasters that have. So I would urge you to go Google that, and then you can see those answers.
So we did a lot of first-party data from a media market perspective, and what we saw is that there was a lot of shift in time spent in time bands. So instead of audiences listening between 6 and 9, what you saw is that 7 to 10 became the new morning drive, and we saw a lot of increases in the afternoon shows. So like your mid-morning shows, where because of the availability of audiences, so there was a lot of people listening around that time. And surprisingly, even the after 7 o'clock listening went extremely high on some of our radio stations, which was quite interesting. So I want to touch on your media mix, because you mentioned how radio is relevant from an ecosystem perspective and from a media mix perspective. And obviously it all links to creativity at the same time, if you think about it. So as an opinion, this is where I'm asking for your opinion. Mm-hmm. And I'd also like some of our attendees to weigh in on this, is because radio has become an ecosystem, do you think people still see it as more terrestrial, and they haven't come to the point where you can actually use it as a visual medium through the engagement, through social media, through its digital platforms and all of that? So from your opinion, what do you think of that? Because it does encompass everything at the same time right now.
So you're absolutely right. That it, radio can be an ecosystem. So every broadcaster, outside of MediaMark even, so your competitors too, everyone has a ecosystem. And no, I think that it's, my opinion is that it is very, very difficult for a media planner to plan in that ecosystem. So I can have different currency measurement for radio, can have different currency measurement for TV, and then I've got a whole bunch of different stats for digital. And then I also have different stats for Facebook. It's not a magic button. So I think that broadcasters and industry bodies perhaps have a role to play in educating and making it easier for media planners and brands to actually tap in to the whole ecosystem.
Lovely. We have a question from Britta Reed. And she asks, can you elaborate why the Kantar ROI slide looks different from the PRC and Nielsen ROI slide in a public domain?
I'm not entirely sure which ROI slide, because I showed a few. I don't know which one it is, but I can tell you that those are obviously based on the campaigns that we tracked. And those are not only the campaigns in South Africa, but the data is taken from, campaigns across the world. So I'm not sure. I suppose it's just a different database, perhaps a different sample size. So ours, just the campaigns that we tracked within this year and towards the end of last year, like I said, it covers off around 2.4 billion rand spend. And then the global campaign is, probably way in excess of that in terms of dollars. So I don't know. I guess both things. I have seen the Nielsen one. I think the percentages might be different, but overall, I think the theme is the same. I would be hard pressed to think that Nielsen would say 90% of sales is driven by media.
Yeah.
Hi, can I pitch in?
Hi, Britta.
There you go. Hi, Britta.
Hi, if you're happy to, thanks, you unmuted me. So if I can join the conversation, thanks very much. No, the slide that I was looking at, and I bring it up because, you know, we're looking at the specific slide I was looking at was not the percentage of ROI for the overall in the mix, but rather you showed that television delivers the greatest ROI and that it is followed by digital and then by radio. And then thereafter, there was print. Now, of course, it is no surprise that the PRCs has been showing or has had for some time a slide on their website where they are certainly suggesting, I think, that radio performs a lot worse, that print performs better. And it's the kind of thing that I think confuses when there are two sets of data that show these sort of differences. I think it can be confusing for the industry. Obviously, there are different techniques, etc. There are a lot of things around it. It's putting you on the spot because you don't have the slide. I don't have the slide to hand. So perhaps the point is that it might be a really useful follow-up to the session to be able to just contextualize in more detail for the industry where these two viewpoints are coming from.
Sure. So I'm happy to just give you the, you know, the elevator 20-second answer. Is the first thing is that I can show you, you know, I can show you lots of case studies. I can show you case studies where TV was the best. I can also show you case studies where TV was the worst. And I can do that for every single touch point in the media mix, right through to, I don't know, LinkedIn advertising. And I think that's important. So I think there is a different agenda for broadcasters and for media owners than there is perhaps for brands. The one thing that is very important is that all touch points can deliver. That chart that we saw that said, hey, the one that you're referring to, Britta, which said TV over indexes, that is simply because of the creatives within different channels. So every touch point can deliver. TV can deliver. It can also be really sucky. Print can deliver brilliantly, and we've seen that. It can also be really sucky. So the biggest thing there is really around the power of the creative. If you have a campaign that has a wonderful creative, all your channels are going to perform. If you don't, they won't. And that's where the differences come in. So I have seen lots of case studies, and the PRC is right. It doesn't make that data right and this wrong. It makes the viewpoint different because that data shows good creative.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Monique. Britta, since I have you here, I'd like to pose a question.
Sorry, can I just pick up on that? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's correct to say that creative plays a huge role. We also know that reach is an important factor in the kind of impact, ROI impact that can be delivered. So that take that point. But I just think, I mean, I could add to say, well, obviously the PRC's slide is based on a very specific category, which is, the fast-moving consumer goods, for example. I just think it will be, and I know everyone can make a case for a particular thing. You were there showing averages over a large range, which is what is always useful to say to help us get to a generalization. I think the point is just that it would be useful for everyone to unpack why you get the different viewpoints, and it's something that people can reference when they are mildly confused by the fact that they are going to at some point in
yeah, well, I mean, I'll put it out there. If anyone is mildly confused on this webinar, or they want more information on different touch points or learnings, whether they be South Africa global or category specific, please do reach out to me. I'll be happy to engage in a conversation.
Brilliant.
So, Britta, since I have you here, and you touched on a lot of stuff. So could you give us your opinion in terms of the importance of radio within the media mix? Because you did touch on a couple of metrics in terms of the reach, the frequency, which is, we know that a lot of clients or a lot of categories are measured on from a KPI perspective. So how would you give your opinion in terms of the importance of radio within the media mix?
I think you have to put it into an overall context. What is the task? What is the target market? What is the budget? What do you have to play with? What is your creative? I've heard, we know that it does deliver on reach, which is a phenomenally important metric if you are wanting to shift consumers' attitudes and behavior. It is one of the fundamental things that you are going to have to deal with, and it certainly can deliver on that. But I think, I don't think I could give a really generalized point of view beyond what I've said.
100%. Thank you very much, Prithareed and Monique, for that robust conversation that we had. And thank you to everybody who has been with us here. I would like to hand over to, I don't actually think I can call him my homeboy, but I do call him my homeboy, Wayne Bishop, who's our CEO, to give us a closing. Wayne, take it off, my man.
Thanks to me, my homeboy. Cool, man. You make me feel younger than I actually am. Yeah, just a couple of comments before I finally sort of say goodbye to everyone, is that, the comments from Katerina and Monique really kind of reiterated for me that we've made the right move as MediaMarkt. We've repositioned ourselves as a digital and audio solutions company. So when we talk about the importance of having a robust audio strategy, it reflects what we're trying to do as a company. Other thing you spoke about quite a bit was the importance of good creative. And earlier this year, when we could travel, I was in Europe, with ECTA, and a whole day of conferencing was around the importance of good creative. And what came out of that was that great creative in radio is actually more important, as the research I saw, Britta, you might want to see this, more important than reach and frequency in delivering ROI. So great creative was all about that. There was even some companies with a great tool, which you sort of fed your audio ad through, and it spat it out the other side, an algorithm, and it told you whether it was going to be a great ad or not, whether we get good ROI. And we have to start looking at that. So a personal passion of mine is to start driving great audio creative, and it's been an issue for the last, 20 odd years in this industry. But yeah, so just quickly for me, I just want to thank you to me and the MediaMarkt In The Know team for everything you've done right now. And we try with these In The Know webinars to kind of help industry understand what's happening in the media space as a whole, and digital and audio even more specifically. And a special thanks to Katerina Borowska. I think I pronounced it correctly this time. I think you're in Brussels right now. Thank you, Monique, for your passion and your presentation. We really do value these partnerships, and we're educating ourselves internally as MediaMarkt, and we're helping hopefully bring knowledge to the broader industry, because we're all in it together. We all want to stimulate the economy and shorten this recession, and take the learnings around that. So yeah, thank you guys for attending. Appreciate your time. We will have these presentations, recordings emailed to you, and any further questions, please drop us a line one-on-one or call. We're always available. So thank you, everyone, and thanks, team, and have a great day, everyone. Cheers.